What's up, y'all? Welcome to Seeds of Wisdom podcast. My name is Anthony Hall, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about perfectionism and procrastination. For the last 7 years, I have been holding on to the same words that God has given me many years ago, and that was essentially to start a podcast. And here we are 7 years later, and I'm starting it. There's a lot of lessons that goes behind this because my reason for not doing the podcast was because to a certain degree I felt like I needed to be perfect and I wanted to have everything together. I wanted to have, my lights set up. I wanted to have the perfect camera, the perfect everything, instead of just doing what God had told me to do. Now, this was a dream, a vision that God had showed me many years ago. And it's funny because, back when God was telling me about the podcast, there was nobody really doing podcasts like that. There was not really anybody that I could gauge my podcast off of or someone that I could measure to give me some kind of blueprint. And so I really just didn't know what to do. I was like, all right, well, I just guess I'm not going to do it. And I would talk about it for many years. For my friends that are listening to this, y'all have heard me talk about this podcast for several years. And a lot of them have gotten tired of hearing about it because when God is giving you a specific word or instructions, there's no need for us to play the game of telling your friends and telling people and then waiting for them to validate what God has already told you. And then once they've already validated it, there's still no action to follow up the thing that God had told you to do. And so I figured going into 2025, I said to myself, okay, I'm only getting older. Time is still passing. And excuse me because I have a cold, so I'm working through it. We're going into 2025, and I said, I don't want there to be another year that goes by that God has called me into something and I refuse to step into it because I don't know whose life or destiny could be behind certain conversations. Or for yourself, there are things that God has placed on the inside of you that won't get to others if your mouth stays closed, or if your hands don't move, or if you don't step up to the thing that God has called you to. So the overall thing going into 2025 is now, how can we focus on the things that God has given us, the things that God has told us, without procrastinating and without feeling the need of having to be perfect? What I've identified was perfectionism was just another form of pride because we were so focused, or should I say, I was focused on my own ability and how I would show up rather than just allowing the Holy Spirit in me to just show up. It's simple. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate it in the faith because we are the ones that are speaking or we're the ones that are showing up. And so it's often easy for us to put ourselves first and how we look and how we're perceived by others and what people think about us. But it's not until you stop caring about what people think, what it looks like, it's not until you realize that it's not about us, but rather how God could use you as a utensil to push out whatever it is that He is trying to bring out on the earth. And it's a blessing that He gets to choose us to be a part of that journey, to be able to spread the gospel or whatever capacity that we're called to serve. When we start talking about this perfectionism and pride, they kind of go hand in hand. Whether we want to agree with that or not, or want to put those two in the same category, essentially it is. And what happens is perfectionism leads us to a place of procrastination. Because when you're trying to get everything together and every piece in one box, every puzzle piece put together, everything has to be perfect, then there's a new perfect that presents itself once you get to what you thought was air quote perfect. It's never going to be perfect because we're imperfect people. And anytime you're sending imperfect people to do something, it's not going to be done with perfection. But it doesn't have to be perfect, but it must be done. God is not calling us to be perfect in any of the things that He is sending us out to do, but rather be willing to take up whatever it is, whatever our responsibility is, and to go out and participate in the things that God has called us to. So my hope and my prayer going into 2025 is that we are not holding on to perfectionism. We're not procrastinating, but rather we are walking in the things that God has called us to, because it's not going anywhere. When God called you, He called you. We can't be like the Israelites where we get stuck in the wilderness. It's like God has brought you out of Egypt, and now you're on your way to the promised land, but then you're stuck in the space of Egypt. It's time to get the momentum. It's time to start moving and doing what God has called you to do. Let not another day, another year go by where you are constantly talking about it, dreaming about it, praying about it. There's no need to pray about the things that God has already told you to do. It's time to act. It's our actions that go into agreement with the things that God has told us and instructed us to do. And we have to trust God in every step of the journey as we are going out to pursue whatever the thing that God had told us to do. And so that's pretty much it for this episode. I'll be posting another one. And again, I know that this particular episode is not perfect. There's a lot more that I probably could have said, or a certain way that I could have done it. But you know what? I did it. And that's the most important part for me. And I know God is rejoicing that the podcast was done. Because as this podcast episode will be a prime example, is you grow with time. It does not have to be perfect. It just has to be done. Because one word, one sentence can bless somebody's life and change the trajectory of their destiny. Whatever book, whatever podcast, whatever video, whatever ministry, whatever it is that God has told you to start, think no further, look no further. Let this podcast be a sign for you. Go out and go get it. All right? I love y'all. I will be posting another video soon. I believe I'll be posting them every Wednesday mornings, Wednesday afternoons. I'm not sure just yet, but like, subscribe, comment, and let me know the other things that you want us to talk about in these podcast episodes. All right. Peace out.